We created demons, not men. The terrifying confession of a U.S. general, December 1943, Italian Apennines, Mount La Difensa. American Ranger Captain Michael O'Hara was climbing the slope that his unit had unsuccessfully stormed for 3 straight days. German machine gun nests mowed down every attack, artillery turned the rocks into mass graves, and command was already preparing retreat orders. But that night, someone else took this mountain in 6 hours, and O'Hara went to see the result. What he saw at the summit made this combat officer with 3 years of experience double over and empty his stomach right onto the frozen ground. The German bunker stood intact, not a single grenade hole, not a single trace of explosives. Inside were 14 SS soldiers, and all 14 lay in the positions where silence found them. None managed to fire, none managed to scream. Each had their throat cut so cleanly that O'Hara first thought it was some kind of disease, but this was only the beginning of the nightmare. On each body's chest lay a small paper card with broken German text, Das Schlimmste kommt noch. The worst is yet to come. O'Hara picked up one card with numb fingers and only then noticed the emblem, crossed arrows on a red background. He knew this emblem. The entire Italian front knew this emblem. These were the underscore quote, underscore 3 underscore, the first Special Service Force, whom American generals preferred not to mention aloud. And yet the most terrifying discovery awaited O'Hara outside the bunker. In the snow, he found tracks, or rather, barely found them. About 40 men had climbed a vertical cliff 300 meters high at night, in a blizzard, without a single sound. They passed 3 German patrols so closely they could have touched the sentries with their hands. They eliminated a garrison of 60 men in 40 minutes. And they vanished before dawn, leaving behind only corpses and those damn cards. Who were these people? Where did they come from? And why did one American general later write words in a secret report that make blood run cold? We created demons, not men, and I'm not sure we can turn them back. To understand how a group of lumberjacks from Quebec, miners from Yukon, and barroom brawlers rejected by the regular army transformed into the only unit the SS refused to fight in darkness, we must go back 2 years. The story you're about to hear will forever change your understanding of the word. Quote 5. Spring of 1942 proved catastrophic for the Allies. Japan captured the Philippines, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies. Rommel was crushing the British in North Africa. German submarines sank convoys in the Atlantic faster than American shipyards could build new vessels. The U.S. War Department desperately sought any way to strike the enemy, and precisely at this moment, one of the most insane plans in World War II history landed on General George Marshall's desk. However, this plan's madness was merely the tip of the iceberg. The project's author was British inventor Geoffrey Pike, a man contemporaries called either genius or madman, often simultaneously. Pike proposed creating special snowmobiles capable of operating in Arctic winter conditions, landing sabotage groups in Norway, and systematically destroying German hydroelectric plants, heavy water facilities, and supply lines. The plan was called Project Plow, and on paper it looked almost reasonable, but implementing this plan required special people, not just soldiers, fighters capable of surviving at minus 40 degrees, moving on skis across rough terrain at forced march speed, blowing up bridges and tunnels, then vanishing into white silence before Germans understood what happened. The American Army of 1942 had no such people. Most conscripts came from eastern seaboard cities and had seen snow only on Christmas cards, and then someone in Washington remembered Canada. This decision would change the war's course and create monsters nobody expected. Canada had been fighting Germany since September 1939, a full 2 years longer than the USA. Canadian volunteers had endured the Dieppe nightmare, Atlantic convoy battles, Britain's bombings. They were older, angrier, and more experienced than any American conscript, and critically important for Project Plow, many had spent their entire lives in conditions Americans considered unfit for human existence. On June 20th, 1942, the U.S. and Canadian governments signed a secret agreement creating the first Special Service Force. This was history's first binational Allied combat unit. Americans provided financing, equipment, and command. Canadians provided something more valuable: men who already knew how it feels when someone shoots at you. But gathering these men in one place proved harder than anyone anticipated, and what happened in the first weeks nearly buried the entire project. The first American volunteers arrived at Fort Harrison in July 1942, and Colonel Robert Frederick realized he'd received not elite fighters but a headache. Army Command used the new unit as a dumping ground for difficult soldiers. Those other commanders wanted to offload anywhere. Among the first batch of volunteers were deserters returned from flight, military prison inmates offered service instead of sentences, and simply violent psychopaths unable to fit into any normal unit. However, true chaos began 2 weeks later. The Canadian contingent arrived, and the contrast was staggering. Canadians weren't, quote, nine. They were volunteers in the purest sense, men who came to recruitment offices themselves and requested assignment to the new unit. But while American underscore, quote, underscore 10 underscore soldiers had at least completed basic training, many Canadians had zero military experience. They came straight from logging camps, mines, fishing trawlers. They could survive in wilderness better than any American ranger, but didn't know how to properly salute an officer. The two contingents instantly hated each other. Americans viewed Canadians as country bumpkins who couldn't hold formation. Canadians viewed Americans as loud, overconfident youngsters who'd never spent a day in real war. The first week ended with 12 hospitalizations from barracks fights. The second week, 8 more. Military police refused to enter fort territory without backup, and then Colonel Frederick made a decision everyone considered madness. He didn't separate the warring factions, he didn't punish instigators. Instead, he did something unheard of for the 1942 Army. He ordered men housed so each tent had equal Americans and Canadians. Want to fight your tent mate? Go ahead. But tomorrow you'll go into the mountains with that tent mate, and if he doesn't pull you from a crevasse, you'll stay there forever. This was a bet on human nature, and it worked, but not as command expected. The hatred didn't disappear, but transformed. American convicts discovered Canadian hicks could march 20 hours through chest-deep snow without complaining. Canadian lumberjacks discovered American psychopaths could fix any mechanism on Earth and fought dirtier than any Montreal bar brawler. A common enemy, in human training conditions, accomplished what no propaganda could. But the worst for these men was yet to come, because Frederick's training program was only beginning, and it would transform them into those very quote 14 the training program Frederick developed had no equivalent in Allied armed forces. It would have no equivalent today either, because modern armies simply wouldn't permit such casualty levels during preparation. In the first 3 training months, the unit lost over 20% of personnel, not in combat, but from injuries, frostbite, and accidents. Frederick considered this an acceptable price. Each day began at 4 a.m. with a run in full gear, not jogging on flat roads, running uphill, over rocks, in any weather. After running, hand-to-hand combat using methods Frederick personally borrowed from British commandos. No sporting techniques, only strikes capable of incapacitating an opponent or ending their existence within seconds. Elbows, knees, head to face, fingers to eyes, and this was merely warm-up before the real hell. Men who yesterday considered themselves street fighters discovered they knew nothing about real violence. After hand-to-hand came rock climbing, without safety gear, without equipment, in full kit. The mountains around Fort Harrison became the final resting place for those lacking innate self-preservation instincts or sufficient physical strength. Frederick personally attended every session and personally escorted the injured to medical. He didn't apologize or explain, he simply said, quote 16, but the program's main element was what Frederick called night operations. These transformed ordinary soldiers into creatures even allies would later fear. Every 2 or 3 nights, the unit was roused by alarm and sent into the mountains with orders, find and eliminate a notional enemy, played by instructors or other platoons, no light, no noise, no shots until the attack moment. Men learned to move in complete darkness so someone 5 meters away heard nothing. They learned to sense enemy presence by smell, by subtle air movement, by changes in night sounds. By autumn 1942, Fort Harrison became a legend whispered about on every Western Coast base. Local residents stopped leaving homes after sunset. Too many stories circulated about black-faced ghosts appearing from nowhere and vanishing into nothing. And then an incident occurred that first made command wonder, what exactly were they creating? Military police sent to investigate reports of strange activity were captured by a trainee group in 11 minutes. Officers simply couldn't understand where the men came from who suddenly appeared behind them with knives at their throats. When one policeman asked how they did it, a Canadian corporal answered with a smile, quote, 21. This report reached Washington, and that's when the word demons first appeared in documents. The knife. This word requires separate discussion because the knife became the symbol of the Black Devils, a symbol still inspiring dread among military historians. Frederick understood special operations required special weapons, and he turned to the man who could create it, former British Army Lieutenant Colonel William Fairbairn, co-creator of the legendary commando knife. Their collaboration produced the V-42, a combat stiletto with no equal among Allied standard weapons, an 18-centimeter blade, double-edged, with a characteristic stinger tip capable of piercing a steel helmet, a handle with a skull crusher, a sharpened pommel designed for strikes to the temple or skull base, leather sheath with a metal tip that itself could serve as a weapon. This wasn't a tool. It was an extension of the hand, created for one purpose, but receiving a knife was half the battle. Learning to wield it, an entirely different story. Each unit fighter received a V-42 and completed a 40-hour handling course, not fencing, handling, how to enter a room knife in hand, how to neutralize an opponent before they can scream, how to work in complete darkness, orienting only by breathing sounds, how to deliver strikes guaranteeing incapacitation within 2 or 3 seconds. American hand-to-hand combat instructors from the regular army watched these sessions with expressions of horror. One of them, Sergeant James McMillan, later recalled, quote, 26, and yet one more element remained that would transform these fighters into any opponent's nightmare. The knife came with an innovation, black camouflage paint for face and hands. The idea itself wasn't new. British commandos used similar camouflage back in '41. But Frederick transformed black faces into psychological weaponry. He ordered his men to paint faces not just for concealment but for intimidation, completely, including ears and neck, with emphasized white eyes and bare teeth. When such a face appeared from darkness, 1 meter from a sentry, there wasn't even time for a scream, only white eyes, a snarl, and silence. But the real test for the devils still lay ahead, and it nearly destroyed everything Frederick had created. Winter 1942 to 43 brought Fort Harrison not only cold, but bitter disappointment. Project Plow, for which the unit was created, began collapsing. The special snowmobiles meant to form Norwegian operations bases proved a mechanical nightmare. They broke down below -20, got stuck in deep snow, and made such noise that stealth became impossible. By February 43, Command acknowledged the original plan was unfeasible. For any other unit, this would mean disbandment. The 1st Special Service Force had by then consumed millions of dollars and thousands of man-hours, yet seemed useless soldiers trained for Arctic conditions that existed on no active theater of operations. And then that memorandum landed on High Command's desk. A general whose name remains classified wrote, "We created demons, not men. I'm not sure I want to release them onto the battlefield because I'm not sure I can control them afterward, but disbanding them means discarding 2 years of work and admitting the American Army can only create problems, not solutions." This memorandum could have been a death sentence. Instead, it became a pass to war. Colonel Frederick convinced Command to give his men a chance. His argument was simple. In 8 training months, he'd created not a, quote, 30, but universal fighters capable of operating anywhere requiring speed, stealth, and absolute ruthlessness. Mountain warfare in Italy? They trained on Montana's cliffs. Night raids? They'd spent more time in darkness than daylight. High Command hesitated several more weeks. Then war itself decided for them. By mid-1943, the Allies landed in Sicily and began the long, bloody path north up the Italian quote, 31 and on this path lay a mountain nobody could take, a mountain awaiting its quote, 32 Mount La Difensa. Elevation 960 meters. The north face, a virtually vertical cliff wall, southern and eastern slopes, minefields, and 3 lines of machine gun nests with crossfire coverage. At the summit, a fortified bunker complex where a German mountain division battalion dug in with orders to hold to the last man. American units stormed La Difensa 6 times. 6 times they climbed the southern slope under withering fire. 6 times they fell back, leaving hundreds of bodies on the slope. Casualties reached such levels that division commanders openly refused sending their men on new attempts. The mountain blocked the entire Italian front's advance, and General Clark desperately sought any alternative to frontal assault. The alternative arrived in November 1943. 1,800 men in non-standard uniforms, with non-standard weapons and non-standard facial expressions. The 1st Special Service Force received its first combat order, take La Difensa, and the plan Frederick proposed made staff officers conclude the colonel had finally lost his mind. Instead of attacking the southern slope like all previous units, he proposed climbing the northern one, that same impassable cliff wall Germans hadn't even bothered guarding. 300 meters of vertical ascent, at night, in December, in full combat gear, without safety equipment because any sound meant mission failure. On paper, this was suicide. But Frederick knew his men. He knew what they could do. He knew what they'd become. And the night of December 3rd proved the demons were ready. The operation began immediately after sunset. 600 fighters advanced to the cliff base in conditions describable by only one word: hell. Temperature dropped below 0, wet snow began falling, turning rocks into an ice rink. Each man carried about 30 kilograms of equipment: ammunition, grenades, rations for 2 days, and of course, a V-42 on the belt. The climb began at 2300 hours, and from that moment time ceased existing for these men. Men moved in complete silence, clinging to wet rocks with numb fingers. One wrong step meant falling into the abyss. One accidental sound meant detection and destruction of the entire column by German machine guns above. Sergeant Tommy Prince, a Canadian Métis from Manitoba, later recalled that during 4 hours of climbing, he heard not a single word. Men communicated only through gestures rehearsed in training to reflex level. By 3 a.m., the first groups reached a ledge 30 meters below German positions. Here began the second phase, waiting. Men lay on a narrow ledge, pressed against each other, unable even to move. Temperature kept dropping. Clothing soaked through. Some fighters began losing consciousness from hypothermia, but nobody made a sound. 90 minutes in frozen hell, and not a single groan. And then fate gave them their chance. At 4:30 a.m., a German sentry left the bunker. He took 3 steps from the door and ceased to exist. Private Joe Glass from Alberta appeared behind him like a shadow, and the V-42's work took exactly 2 seconds. The body softly settled onto snow, making no sound. This was the signal. The underscore quote, underscore 35, underscore broke free. The next 40 minutes entered history as one of World War II's most brutal hand-to-hand engagements. 600 men with black faces poured over the cliff edge like a wave, engulfing German positions before defenders understood what was happening. In darkness, in the cramped bunkers and trenches, firearms were nearly useless, too great the risk of hitting friendlies. But knives worked flawlessly. German soldiers were Wehrmacht elite, mountain division veterans who'd fought in Norway, Crete, the Caucasus. They were prepared for conventional combat. They weren't prepared for creatures with black faces and knives leaping from darkness, cutting men as if they'd done nothing else their entire lives. Colonel Frederick was in the attack's front ranks, yet another violation of all Army regulations. A unit commander shouldn't personally participate in an assault, but Frederick didn't recognize these rules. In 40 minutes of fighting, he received 2 wounds but refused to leave the front line. When sun began rising over the horizon, the Allied flag already flew over La Difensa's main bunker, but the scene revealed by daylight made even hardened officers shudder. German casualties exceeded 100, the vast majority from edged weapons. Untold Brigade casualties, 73 wounded, 14 gone forever. For an assault on a fortified mountain position, these were incredibly low figures. American units attacking the same mountain previously lost 300 to 400 per attempt, But statistics don't convey what Captain O'Hara saw, don't convey the expressions on fallen Germans' faces, expressions of absolute primal terror, don't convey how a place smells where 600 men worked knives for 40 minutes, and statistics don't convey those small cards victors carefully placed on the vanquished. Quote 36. The worst is yet to come. For Germans, this wasn't just a warning, it was a promise, and the demons kept it. After La Difensa came La Remetanea and Monte Mayo, two more impregnable mountains the brigade took within a week. Then Anzio and the bloody beachhead, where Allies held 4 months against continuous German counterattacks. At Anzio, the Black Devils earned their main reputation as the unit best not encountered after sunset. Frederick, by then promoted to brigadier general, developed an aggressive patrolling system that drove German commanders insane. Every night, groups of 8 to 10 men went beyond Allied perimeter lines and penetrated German territory. They didn't occupy positions or engage in open combat. They hunted, and this hunt's methods exceeded anything this war had seen. A typical raid looked like this. The group silently crawled to a German dugout or trench, chose the moment when the sentry was distracted, and eliminated him with cold steel. Then, a quick rush inside, knife work in darkness, and withdrawal before reinforcements arrived. But the most sophisticated element was psychological warfare. Cards were left on bodies bearing the brigade emblem and German text, sometimes simple messages like, "The worst is yet to come," sometimes personal notes, "We know your name, we'll be back for you." Surviving German soldiers found these cards in the morning and understood that during the night someone had been in their trenches, walked among the sleeping chosen victims. These raids' psychological effect was devastating. German soldiers facing the brigade began suffering mass insomnia and nervous breakdowns. Commanders reported men refusing night duty. Rumors spread of, quote, 43 who could pass through walls. One captured German officer declared during the interrogation, quote, 44. That's when the term Schwarze Teufel, Black Devils, had emerged. German command officially used this designation in intelligence reports, warning units of the brigade's presence in their sector. This was an extremely rare case. Usually Third Reich propaganda mocked the enemy rather than demonizing them. But jokes didn't work with the Black Devils, and that American general who wrote "We created demons" proved correct. The only question was, could these demons stop themselves? By summer 1944, the brigade reached peak combat effectiveness and peak dark fame. After Rome's liberation in June 44, the unit was transferred to southern France for Operation Dragoon, the Allied landing on the Mediterranean coast. And here, the quote, 49 showed what they could do when completely unleashed. On August 10, 1944, brigade advance groups landed on the Ile d'Hier off the Provence coast. The islands were controlled by a German garrison of about 800 men, veterans prepared to defend to the last round. Command allocated 72 hours for the operation and expected around 40% casualties. The brigade took the islands in 15 hours. Casualties were under 5%. The German garrison was partially destroyed, partially captured, with many prisoners surrendering voluntarily upon learning whom they faced. Surviving German officers later recounted that their soldiers literally threw down weapons and raised hands upon seeing red and white patches with crossed arrows. The demons' reputation worked better than any artillery. But behind this reputation lurked a dark side. After the Yare Islands, the brigade entered mainland France and began what command later called the fastest advance in Mediterranean theater history. In 2 weeks, the unit covered nearly 300 kilometers, liberating town after town, village after village. German resistance in this sector essentially collapsed. Too many stories circulated about black ghosts appearing from nowhere and leaving no survivors. The last claim requires clarification, and it concerns the brigade's darkest chapter. Officially, the 1st Special Service Force observed the Geneva Conventions and took prisoners when possible. Unofficially, sufficient evidence exists that during night raids, the _quote_53 indeed rarely bothered capturing live Germans. War makes people pragmatic. Prisoners require guards, food, transport. A corpse requires nothing. And the underscore quote underscore 54 underscore learned to be very pragmatic. General Frederick never publicly confirmed or denied these rumors. When a journalist asked in 45 about his unit's brutality, he answered briefly, "My men did what was necessary for victory. If you want to discuss brutality, speak with those who started this war." But even for demons, war couldn't continue forever, and their story's finale proved as unexpected as its beginning. On December 5th, 1944, the 1st Special Service Force was officially disbanded. Reasons were primarily political. The Canadian government wanted its soldiers back under national command, while American generals wanted to use the Devil's experience to create their own special operations units. The brigade's final parade took place in the French town of Menton, right on the Italian border. Men who 2 years earlier had hated each other stood shoulder to shoulder, Americans and Canadians, quote, 59, and lumberjacks, those their own generals called underscore, quote, underscore, 60 underscore, and in their eyes was something that hadn't been there 2 years before, something that would never disappear. 2 years of unit statistics speak for themselves. The brigade spent 115 days directly on front lines, more than any other Allied unit of comparable size. It suffered casualties exceeding 300% of original strength, meaning personnel completely turned over 3 times. It captured over 12,000 prisoners, with strength never exceeding 2,400 men. But dry figures don't convey the main thing, don't convey what those who survived were like when they returned home, don't convey the nightmares from which veterans woke in cold sweat decades after the war, don't convey how a Quebec lumberjack or Montana miner tried explaining to wife and children why they flinched at sudden sounds and slept with knives under pillows. That general who wrote, "We created demons, not men," proved right in ways he himself didn't understand. Demons can be created, but turning them back into men, that task proved beyond anyone's power. One survivor, Canadian Corporal Jean-Paul Bergeron, left memoirs published only after his passing in 1987. He wrote, "When we went to war, we were men. When we returned, we were something else, not better or worse, just different. We saw things that cannot be unseen. We did things that cannot be spoken of. And we carried this within us until the end." These words are the best answer to that general. Yes, they created demons. But these men became demons not by their own will. War made them so, necessity made them so, and those who gave orders made them so. But the Black Devil's story doesn't end there, because their legacy lives on in places most people don't even suspect. When in 1952 the U.S. Army created its first post-war special operations units, the famous Green Berets, the model was precisely the 1st Special Service Force. Night raid tactics, psychological warfare, autonomous small groups, all came from Fort Harrison and Montana's mountains. Canadian Armed Forces also didn't forget. Canada's modern Joint Task Force 2 officially considers itself heir to the underscore quote underscore 65 underscore traditions. Their fighters wear the red and white patch with crossed arrows, that same emblem Germans feared finding on their fallen comrades. In 2015, the U.S. Congress posthumously awarded all brigade veterans the highest civilian honor, the Congressional Gold Medal. This was belated recognition for men their own command once called underscore, quote, underscore 66 underscore, and tried erasing from history. At the Washington ceremony, the last survivors attended, men over 90 in wheelchairs, medals on chests, and empty eyes of those who'd seen too much. A journalist asked one of them, Tommy McKenzie from Vancouver, how he wanted to be remembered. The old man was silent long, then said, "Don't remember us as heroes. We weren't heroes. We were tools, very effective tools for very dirty work. If you want to remember something, remember that war transforms normal people into what they never wanted to be, and remember that some of us could never transform back." This is perhaps the most honest epitaph for the Black Devils. They were monsters, but they were our monsters. They did what ordinary soldiers couldn't, and they paid a price no medals or parades can measure, and somewhere in declassified archives still lies that memorandum. Quote, 69. The general who wrote those words wanted to warn command about danger. He didn't understand that he'd actually written an epitaph, not for the unit, but for the humanity of those sent to war. They left as men, they returned as demons, and nobody ever found a way to bring them back. Now you know their story. The only question is, what will you do with it?